Hello everybody, my name is Abby, and today I will be walking you through a brief history of theater. All the information in this little video here can be found in Chapter 10 of the Explore Theater textbook. Alright, let's get started. It all starts with the Greeks. Their philosophers, their ideology, the style all influenced the beginning of theater as we really know it. The first recorded evidence of theater being performed were the plays of Thespis, but the major playwrights of the era were Aeschylus, who was responsible for writing plays like Agamemnon, Prometheus Bound, which actually went on to influence Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and The Seven Against Thebes. Another big contributor was Sophocles, who wrote Oedipus the King, Antigone, which the two plays are related, having the same family storyline, and Philoctetes. Euripides was another big one. He wrote plays such as Medea and The Trojan Woman. And lastly, one of the biggest playwrights was Aristophanes, who wrote Lysistrata. And if you haven't read it, I highly would recommend it. It's a really funny laugh. As far as innovations go, you can really consider anything that the Greeks did innovation because they were the first to really put theater on the stage that we know. Their biggest contributions were comedy, tragedy, satyr plays, obviously the chorus, which me being a dancer is very important, and the amphitheater. It was the first real stage that it saw. Theater thrived in Greece for a multitude of reasons, but the biggest one is really that civilization became civilized. They didn't have to worry about staying alive, they had food, they had shelter, so it became more evolved, and the classical ideal thrived of order and perfection, and Greek myth really gave them a platform to worship the order and perfection and the gods, but to do it in a theatrical way. This all ended when Alexander the Great of the Roman Empire came in and pretty much took out the Greek civilization, but thus the Roman Empire was born. The Roman Empire, the times of togas, wine, the Catholic Church, and brutal gladiator games. Roman theater was very similar to Grecian theater, being that it drew a lot of its influence from it. However, Romans have a very different taste in entertainment. They mostly focused on comedies and tragedies. Somewhere along the line, the satyr play got lost because the sense of humor is very, very different between a Grecian and a Roman. Under comedies, Plautus wrote plays like Pseudolus, and Terence wrote plays like Andria. Over in the tragedy realm, Seneca wrote plays like Octavia, but most of his plays were closet dramas and really weren't supposed to hit the stage. As far as innovation goes, paratheatrics were king. Chariot races, gladiator games, etc. were the main source of entertainment because they were brutal, and the Romans loved brute. But what they did provide was spectacle, and spectacle is something that the Romans loved. They also, had the arena with the Colosseum. Why theater thrived? Civilization, though very different, was also similar to the Greeks. There wasn't really a nomadic lifestyle, which left free time for entertainment. And the arenas got the audience involved and held thousands of spectators. Spectators that loved to watch what? Spectacle. Violence, crude things happening, the whole nine. However, as great as this all sounds, or as scary as it all sounds, the Roman Catholic Church rose to power, and with that power, gave them the power, as I've said now 3 times, to control everything, and that meant theater. The Middle Ages, also known as the Dark Ages, are known as such for the suppression of expression from the Catholic Church. The Church made the rules everyone was required to play by. However, for artists, there was a loophole. If you created in the influence of God, you could create, and so they did. What they created was liturgical dramas. These dramas involved the telling of biblical stories, and they came in 3 major forms: psycho-mystery plays, mortality plays, and miracle plays, all of which were performed by the troops of the time, and the troops are arguably the biggest contribution of the era. Why theater thrived in this area? Well, it could be argued that it really didn't. If it didn't serve God, it wasn't allowed. That being said, the theater that was produced served the Christian nature of the time, so you could say that it served its purpose. However, this suppression granted artists the ability to get creative when presenting their work. It only had to be about God and spread his message. How it was presented was really up to the playwrights. though still under the thumb of the Catholic Church. As the Protestant Reformation came underway, the Catholic Church was put under question. For both respective parties, liturgical dramas saw their end being outlawed in places like Paris, Trent, and England between the years of 1548 and 1563. However, as a new way of thinking came along, a rebirth for the quest of knowledge and human understanding brought us the Renaissance. The early playwrights of this time were known as the University Wits, being comprised of artists like Thomas Kyd, who wrote the Spanish tragedy and Edward II, and Christopher Marlowe, the master of blank verse, who wrote plays like The Jew of Malta and Dr. Faustus. Artists like Kyd and Marlowe paved the way for the soul of the age, the Sultan of Sonnets, the man who puts the iamb in iambic pentameter, William Shakespeare. He wrote in three primary genres: tragedies, comedies, and histories, with plays like Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the Henrys and the Richards. An honorable mention of the same time period was Ben Jonson, who wrote plays like The Alchemist. Innovations of this time period, probably the biggest one, is the printing press, because now any type of written literature can be spread throughout the land. We start to see women hit the stage, though, disclaimer, this doesn't happen until the very late Renaissance, where it overlaps with the Baroque period. Scenic design makes its way in, though the actors are still wearing masks and it's very simplistic like the Greeks. We also start to see theater reflect life. Why theater thrived is simple. There was a philosophical revolution where people regained their curiosity to answer the daunting questions of life, similar to that of the Greek ideals. And the arts now have funding from patrons. It comes as no surprise that the arts were not funded. They're still not super funded, but now people like William Shakespeare had patrons so that he could create works that they wanted to see. Following a similar path as the Renaissance, we move into the era of French neoclassicism and the English Restoration, also known as the Baroque period, and this is followed by melodrama. Now, neoclassicism was a roughly 200-year period starting in Italy, making its way to France. In this period, after the Renaissance, it grew out of a renewed interest in the classics of Greece and Rome, such as the philosophies of Aristotle and the plays of Seneca. During this period, many in positions of power urged artists and writers to follow the neoclassical ideal, and the theater thrived due to its philosophical outlook and high esteem of ideals it presented, reaching its peak with the work of Molière. The English Restoration begins post-Shakespeare. It is called the Restoration from the restoration of King Charles to the throne after a 20-year run of Puritan control. Major shifts of the time include Italianate staging, women entering the stage, and the comedy of manners. This period reflected the aristocratic society, portraying the classes of the time on stage. Melodrama was a reaction of artists to the neoclassic and Restorate periods. Instead of reflecting how society should act, it reflects how life felt. Melodrama rose to stardom during the Industrial Revolution as a means of escaping the ills that it brought. People needed a release from the stresses of life, and melodrama did that for them. And lastly, we move into the isms of theater, each new style being a reaction of its predecessor. The following clip will introduce the isms in the order in which they appear through history until finally arriving at the theater of today. After melodrama's reign, we see the rise of realism. Instead of escaping the social ills of the time, like melodrama, realism seeked to confront them. Not thinking realism totally reflected life, the more intense naturalism sought out to present why things happened. With some thinking naturalism was too confrontational, artists used symbolism, using abstract ideas to convey their message. In response to the vague nature of symbolism, Expressionism emerges in 1910. Artists like George Kaiser and Eugene Neal rebelled against the materialistic society of the machine age to engage the human spirit. Another movement of the early 20th century are Dadaism and Futurism, though they were much less influential due to their inharmonious nature. This type of work alienated the audience, but artists like Berlioz-Brecht still made work anyway. Lastly, artists like Martin Aeschylus made work in the realm of absurdism in response to the incomprehensible nature of World War II. All of this combined leads up to the postmodern plays of today. Well, that is it. A brief on the history of theater. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new.